Intellectual Property is proudly brought to you by Adams and Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.
Good evening and welcome to the Intellectual Property Show. Joining me in the studio to discuss the protection and commercialization of software is Ross Addis, Technical Architect from Siemens IT Services and Solutions, and James Davies from Adams and Adams Attorneys. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the IP Show.
Thank you. Good evening.
James, starting off with you, I think if I understand correctly, Microsoft, global company, they are currently one of the most prolific patenters in the South African Patent Office. Why would you say is that?
Microsoft believe quite strongly in the protection and the enforcement of their intellectual property and of software programs and software implemented inventions which they create. So not just in South Africa but worldwide, they file many thousands of patent applications to protect their software programs and to exclude others from copying them. And it's a commercial decision at the end of the day. So they clearly think that it's commercially viable to file patents in South Africa to protect that aspect of the software-related invention which is covered by the patent, to exclude others from being able to copy them.
Okay, but if I'm not mistaken, in a South African context, does our system allow for patenting software?
Now that is a little bit of a grey area because the South African Patent Act, like the European and British patent laws, the South African Act says that software or a program for a computer as such is not patentable. That probably relates to the code itself, but a computer system or a method which uses software and which has some new and inventive step may well be patentable. So often the subject of a patent isn't focused on the software code itself, but rather on the method or the system which runs the software.
And the software code itself, how do you protect that?
Software code is, for the terms of the Copyright Act, it is a work which is protected by copyright. So work is very broadly defined. It can be a document or a picture or a drawing or computer code, whether source code or machine code. And it is protected by copyright, so it excludes, in terms of copyright, you can prevent others from copying the actual code, although there's no copyright in ideas, which is why to protect the idea or the functionality of a computer program, you'd normally try and use a patent.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, Ross, from your point of view, when we say patents, copyright and so forth, what is the view from an open source point of view regarding software development and the protection of software?
Well, the open source community think it's more beneficial to release your code, release your software and collaborate, even sometimes collaborate with your competitors, therefore making the software stronger, with more features.
Why is it beneficial?
Because we've got this little thing called the internet. Mm-hmm. So it allows open source software developers to collaborate from around the globe with each other almost in real time on code and features. And of course, more minds get behind some problem often leads to it getting fixed faster.
I can understand if I'm a big corporate company. I'm, for example, Vodacom. I spend a lot of money on software licenses for a database. So, for example, if I use an open source database, then those costs theoretically can be lower. So I can understand from a usage of open source software. But say, for example, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm coding in my garage, as it would be. How do I derive revenue? How do I make money out of open source software?
Well, open source doesn't preclude you from making money. There are a lot of commercial models around different open source products.
Just elaborate on some of those.
Well, for instance, a well-known Linux vendor called Red Hat have a subscription-based model where you pay for support, make sure that you get updates on time, that security is looked at, that everything works. If you have a problem, you have someone to phone. Another one is Canonical, the guys who produce Ubuntu. They've also got a subscription model.
So they make money on the services, the support, yes. Maybe training, so forth.
The open source business model is very geared towards the services industry, which does actually have very good profits, very good margins, as opposed to selling licenses. So it fits well. You'll notice that large vendors who you would have never thought would be going open source 10 years ago are now beefing up their professional services side. IBM is one of the instances. To enable, because they're making money off the services, the seat management, the training, and all that sort of stuff.
So the key thing here is the collaboration, the ability to get input from your users and so forth. Now, James, from your point of view, I mean, if I listen to this, doesn't it sound a lot like a normal license agreement? So there's some kind of proprietary code, call it the software program, and now making it available to somebody in the form of a license, and maybe there's not a royalty involved, so it's a zero royalty. But how is that different from a normal license transaction?
It is a type of license which falls broadly into the category of contracts. And with a contract or a license agreement, you can really agree to anything that you want to agree to, or that the other person will also agree to, as long as it's not illegal or immoral. So if you want to open up your source code in terms of a license agreement where you may limit developers down the line to anything they develop must also have the same license, for example. That's fine. You can do that. That's an option you have. You also, on proprietary software, you have license agreements as well, and that just regulates the use of that software, even though you're not opening the code. You're keeping it secret or keeping it closed. Okay.
So what I'm hearing is that there's, and the question to you would be, is there some learning experiences taken from, or are there learning experiences taken from the open source movement, and do you see a more maturity in the way that we now deal in terms of licensing copyright, licensing computer software and so forth?
With respect to closed source software?
Yes, in terms of the collaboration clauses and so forth.
Well, I don't know. The one thing that I have seen become more prolific recently are the end-user license agreements. Previously, I think vendors used to rely more on copyright to protect their rights. Now, every time you install a new software package, there's an end-user license agreement which you have to agree to. And that's becoming more popular because I think it's a little bit more versatile. So you can put more clauses in there than you could with conventional copyright or with patents. And I think it just helps extend the rights of the vendor. Whether or not it helps them collaborate, I don't know. Probably not with the end-user license agreement.
Ross, as a final question from your point of view in terms of open source, has there been some remarkable South African successes? You mentioned Canonical, that is Mark Shuttleworth, if I'm mistaken. Mm-hmm. Have we seen some big market successes in the open source domain, especially from South Africa?
Well, South Africa, there are open source developers and we collaborate with these international products. But where there's a lot of movement is within the public sector. The government sees great value in going with open source for many social, political, economic reasons. So we are one of the countries that are leading open source in government, in the public sector.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ross. Thank you very much, James, for joining me in the studio tonight.
You're welcome.
Thanks. That's all we have time for on the Intellectual Property Show. Join me again next week, same time. My name's Stefan Lamprecht. Good evening.
Intellectual Property was proudly brought to you by Adams and Adams, rooted in 100 years of excellence in intellectual property law.